So this chart that I brought up here is the it shows you three different things. So the first thing is the S&P 500. So let me get rid of Bitcoin and let me get rid of the S&P 500. So we can see here, the S&P 500 just keeps going straight up.
Mhm.
It just keeps going straight up. It almost looks like, I don't know, maybe what you guys give me your opinions here. It almost looks like this is rigged to go straight up, no matter what happens.
You know what it looks like to me is the opposite of the chart showing the dollar's decline. It's literally the opposite of that. And that's because those profits are directly in line with the debasement of the US dollar. So it is the inverse of the
Yeah.
value of the dollar. Exactly that chart. It
Yeah.
looks totally opposite of that.
So like this one right here. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly the opposite. It's just, if you look at it, one's going up and to the right, the other one's going down and to the right. That's it.
Mhm.
But then if you include the Bitcoin price, the S&P 500's price is not even relevant. It's like there's nothing even there. It's
It's
just
like a flat line.
yeah, there's nothing even there. And then if you go to include the S&P 500 priced in Bitcoin, I'll get rid of the other two just to get rid of the noise. You can see here, this is just crazy.
Wow.
It just keeps going lower and lower. So the S&P 500 is going to trend to zero in terms of Bitcoin forever, but people can't wrap their heads around it because it's just too difficult. They're too used to having the S&P 500 in their lives. They think because the S&P 500 is already at 6,000, it's going to go to 7,000, 8,000, 9,000. Of course, if you keep funding US, if you keep creating more US dollars and adding them to the economy, the S&P 500 will go up. But if
Yeah.
you price the S&P 500 in something that can't be created out of nothing, it trends to zero forever, and it'll keep going lower and lower. Like if we look at the numbers here, at one point you could buy, what was it? I wish I could get rid of this thing. You could buy 10,500 Bitcoin with one share of the S&P 500.
Wow.
Could you imagine that? That's crazy.
You know what this makes me think? I think it was American Hodl that said this, but the S&P 500 stands for Standard and Poor's, which is like exactly what you don't want to be. You don't want to be standard and poor, and that's what it's going to make you over time. But you
Yeah.
know what? I do think there's hope. I think there's hope. I think that maybe there will be a slight recovery eventually when all 500 companies use their growth engines of business to acquire Bitcoin. I think that's the only way out of it for the S&P 500 to not trend to zero against Bitcoin is full adoption of Bitcoin.
I do think a lot of the companies that are in the S&P 500 are going to get knocked out because they're not going to adopt a Bitcoin. And I think what you're saying is probably true, but I think we're going to go lower and lower though. I think we're going to go much, much lower before that happens, before people figure it out.
I agree with you there. Yeah, it's going to take time.
I mean, the S&P 500 today lost, what did I say it was, you guys? $1 trillion?
Yeah.
Oh, no, sorry. That was just the Meg 7. The Meg
Oh.
7 today alone is down $1 trillion.
And
the
that's
total
the best of the
market
best.
cap of Bitcoin is what? Just
2.
above that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it just goes to show you when you're thinking about allocating and thinking about investing your own money, I think one of the key pieces too that we should touch on, I don't know the exact direction you guys were hoping to take this, but I think it is worth highlighting just how overvalued the stock market is in terms of people putting their money based on expectations, on speculation of assuming that things are going to continue like this forever. If you look at the PE ratio, and I think that because I don't really understand this stuff totally myself, I think that it's, I'm decent at, explaining this to people who are like me. So the price to earnings ratio of NVIDIA today, or NVIDIA, is 34.62 today, which is down actually from about a month ago after the big drop today. So 34.62, remember that. So the PE ratio basically means that it would take, if you bought a share in NVIDIA, it would take you 34 years to recoup 100% of that investment. 34 years. Right?
At their current earnings.
At their current earnings today. And if you compare that to Bitcoin, I know it's not apples to apples. One's a stock, one's an asset here, I guess you'd say, or more of a commodity. But Bitcoin's would be about 2 because the compound annual return on Bitcoin is 50%. So if you bought Bitcoin, it would take 2 years to get 100% of your investment back, essentially. So that is a huge, huge gap. And when people think about like the NAV premiums that people are paying on Strategy or on Metaplanet or on Summer Scientific, they're absolutely insignificant to like NVIDIA, Tesla, Apple. the PE ratios don't even make sense. It's just because so many people just do it without even knowing that they're investing in these companies. And as you guys said, it's like an endless loop of just funding these companies to continue to grow without anything really there. It's all based on future expectations, which who knows? Will it trend to zero? Will it go up? I don't know. If I was a gambling man, I would say that any companies not holding Bitcoin are going to trend towards zero.
If something I was thinking about not too long ago is the floor price of every company is going to be whatever their Bitcoin holdings are. Right.
Yeah,
So over
right.
time, all these companies are going to continue to trend to zero until, let's say, for example, at some point, Apple is one of the most profitable companies in the world. Let's say they buy one Bitcoin and they stop. The value of their company is going to trend to zero until it goes down to one Bitcoin. Right.
Yeah.
Just that's just how Bitcoin works. That's just how competition works. That's how markets
Right.
work.
Right.
Like I said, let's say MicroStrategy, their lowest price can be 500,000 Bitcoin, 520,000 Bitcoin, or whatever. Over
Yeah.
time, we're going to see more and more companies accumulating Bitcoin, and they're going to trend towards that Bitcoin price. Maybe we'll have a multiple with people wanting to get exposure to their cash flows. Yeah, I think they're going to trend to zero until they hit their Bitcoin holding.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, that's their liquidation price, right? So if somebody came into a business and wanted to liquidate it, said, "Hey, you have no future as a business," they're going to sell off everything, and it comes down to their floor price of what their assets are worth, right? So that's why people say MSTR has a MNAV of 2.04, which means that its market cap is basically double what its bitcoins were. If it was liquidated right now, all the bondholders would get paid out, probably cash, not Bitcoin, but for the amount of net assets they have. And all these other assets that these companies have are not worth much over time. They're going to continue to trend to zero. And if they don't put Bitcoin on their balance sheet, they won't have anything of real worth.
I think that's the key here is like real. And that's why this show is titled The Stocks Are Fake. That's the thumbnail, I believe, on this one. So stocks are fake. And that's what you have to really keep in mind here when you're thinking through this stuff. What can be created? Everything except again, going back to these three things that I think of as Bitcoin, like precious, scarce, valuable farmland and oceanfront property. So if you think about real versus fake, we kind of talked about, and I kind of just had this realization this week is that there's going to come a point where people just stop accepting fiat in exchange for Bitcoin. I think that most Bitcoiners would agree with that statement at some point. I don't know when it'll be, but at some point, because one's fake, one can be created, one's real, one cannot be created. So when you think about that, you say, okay, well, how can I obtain Bitcoin in the future then? And you think, well, I'm either going to have to trade my time and my energy for it, or I'm going to have to trade another real asset for it, right? That's kind of the two things. But when you think about where the world's moving to right now, and you think about AI, and you think about robots, and the measurement of humans' skills and time is going to go down forever because of that, because we're now competing against robots and AI. So in the future, the value of humans is going to go down versus what it is today. So you're not going to get much for that. You might be able to get some, but it's going to go down forever. So then you think about, okay, so then I can trade some real assets for Bitcoin. What's a real asset though? At that point, what are people going to want to trade for Bitcoin? Gold? Probably not. Stocks? Definitely not. Vehicles, maybe if you need it. But the point is that as this thing goes on and the fake continues to separate from the real, it's going to get very, very hard to accumulate any sort of position of Bitcoin. That's kind of my thesis on this.
Yeah. Electricity. That's what you're going to need to trade. Energy,
right?
Yeah.
I wanted to bring this up just to support your point there, Jor. The wage in terms of dollars is continuing to go up. Bitcoin's price obviously is going up way faster, but then if you get rid of the wage, if you convert the wage into Bitcoin, it's just going straight down, straight down. There's no recovery here. You're never going to go back up to, let's say, at some point you were making 407,000 Bitcoin per year. That was the annual wage if you calculate it in terms of Bitcoin. But today it's at like one Bitcoin.
And it makes sense, right? Because if if you're somebody out there who's doing a job and you make like 70 or 80K salary annually, and now your job can be done by an AI or a robot, of course, our value here is going to continue to trend towards zero forever. And so not only the products that these big companies are creating, the S&P companies that they're creating, you can make more of these easily, and it's going to become easier and easier as technology improves to be able to create these products. But our value as humans is going to continue to go down as well. So at a time where that happens, where people stop trading their real stuff for fake stuff, the amount of sats that you're going to be able to obtain for whatever you're trading is just going to trend towards zero. And that includes stocks.